Welcome back to the next part in my read-through of Shadow's Ember. This is going to be the third final video in the public series. I'll stop posting these after Chapter 4 to avoid any important spoilers. Anyways, let's dive in.
Maker's Log 85911. Sibrii, the Children of Darkness.
My earliest designs were going to be purely robotic. I still have the old parts lying around here too. But they just kept failing. Stress fractures, weathering, you name it, one of them broke to it. Worse, they weren't alive. Not one. But the question kept bugging me. It had happened once, so why not again? I'd seen it. Machines can live. I tried to layer lab-grown muscles and animal parts onto the frames, and it made them a little more lifelike, until they started to rust. But they still weren't living. I had no clue what I was missing. Finally, I dared to try this stolen shard of my ancient enemy. It granted you their powers, but then something more, too. It gave you your life. Tempered by my teachings and love, each of you was born as something wholly new. No longer any one of your three origins. More than that. The dark blood in your veins can reshape even pure metal like it's a wet rag. You were built to take even the toughest punishments. I couldn't stop you from breaking, but I found a way to let you always bounce back again. But your blood comes at a cost, too. Remember, my children, walk in my light, even at your darkest moment. You don't have to be the villains you came from. You can be better. Your elders were my first prototypes, one for each element. Yet somehow, those 5 worked so well, while the rest of you turned out pitifully weak. They age normally, but you Sibrii have lifespans like gnats. After years of fighting with biological nuances, I settled on a truce with a quarter lifespan. It worked, but it meant you needed a way to not spend more than half your lives as children. I had a stroke of what I can only call pure genius. A simple, 2-step system to fix all the problems that threaten to exterminate your species. Heh, already pun. Remote data downloads coupled with an elemental kill switch until your 4th birthday. Talk about a hands-down coolest Sweet 16 gift ever. Or more like a 25th if you also take brain maturity into account. Even a naturally born Sibrii is eloquent within their first few days. And that's how I reforged the darkness into humanity's last line of defense. A piece of animal, a piece of me, a machine's bones, and a little touch of shadow to bind it all together. Those old superhero film shows would have loved my result. 5 whole races of element-wielding cyborg wolverines? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that would have been a box hit in ancient days. Oh, I also forgot to add a glossary in case I somehow end up no longer being the only living person in the solar zip code. So, I'm going to go ahead and break my rule by appending new glossary words and details about the Sibrii as I think of them. Yes, it corrupts the scientific value of dating and paginating these journals, but keeping info organized is far more important to me. Units of measurement. 8 fingers make a hand. Convenient because Sibrii are 4-fingered. 1.5 hands make a foot. Varies from Sibrii to Sibrii. 8 hands make a leg. 2 legs make a head. The most common unit Sibrii think in. Sibrii. Pronounced Sibrii. Or Sibri for singular. Don't ask me why they hate the letter S. The old terms our company used for the cybernetics department are too clunky for them, so the name they call their people eventually got shortened to match their elemental names. Life cycle. I had to compress the Sibri lifespan into roughly 1/4 the typical humans in order to raise their population levels high enough before the darkness breaks through my barrier. One unanticipated result is that years are a much more abstract concept to them, more like decades are to us, while a month in their minds is more comparable to a year. The differences aren't perfect, but just about everything with them is accelerated, so I guess it makes sense. Octets. Sibri don't like to think in base 10. I force them to when I can, but they hate number conversions just as much as I do. Our impasse has resulted in borrowing some interesting colloquial words for their base 8 numbers. The most common and important of which is octet instead of simply 8. They count on an octet of fingers, a year is 2.5 octets of months, a month is half, essentially,
Soft grumbling included.
an octet of days, and so on. Elements. Rome must have rolled in its collective grave when I introduced my Sibri to Latin. Guess what they came up with when naming their 5 fundamental elements. The fire Sibri call themselves Ignii, Aurii for air, Limnii for the water ones, Terrii for earth, and Umbrii for shadow. It's official. Someone else finally tied you for terrible name ideas. Though in their defense, I'm pretty sure Beery or someone came across one of your old research notebooks and just stole those words since they're almost identical to what you called the crystals. Shadow. Yes, I said 5 fundamental elements. Why is shadow an element? Don't ask me. They dissolve into a useless soup whenever I try to design them without it in there. Could it ruin the whole plan? Yes, and I'm trying not to think about that. Elders. These were my first few
Insert successful.
prototypes at making Sibri. One for each of the classical elements, and one more for pure shadow. I was a little too ambitious with them, and now their age and colossal size makes all the newer generations look up to them as leaders. Each element's village ended up forming around its corresponding elder. Word endings. They use -a, pronounced a, suffixes for places. I, pronounced e, for singular nouns and possessives, and I, pronounced ei, for plural. I tried convincing them to bring back conjugations for adjectives as well, but no, they just used the I ending for everything that doesn't fit into the other 2 use cases. Glass and true glass. The Sibri name for Newtonian bending crystals that their bodies can grow and absorb. Wait, why am I explaining this to you of all people? You are always the expert on that subject. And if someone else gets hold of this somehow, and doesn't already know, then they don't deserve to. Let's just say I've taken the idea a lot further than using kudzu to farm the stuff. I think there's some kind of difference in their minds when they call something true glass, but I don't really understand it. Either way, glass is how they power whichever elemental power a Sibri is born with. Maker. Oh goody, my least favorite topic. So, don't get too upset, okay? Look, it started when the elders asked me where life came from. Turns out a few centuries doesn't make that talk any easier to have with your kids. Now, they all call me Maker with a very uncomfortable tone of reverence. I wish I could make them stop too. 2. Morning Haze. Tirak yawned as he stirred another helping of red sand glass into the kettle he was brewing. He needed the extra kick today. He needed it most other days too, but not every day was the anniversary of your parents' slaughter. His mind dodged away as soon as it nudged that thought. A day off. Yeah, he should focus on that. No drills with the other Umber cadets to be on time for. He still needed to check in with his courier boss in the city's lower tiers, but they were Ignii, way more laid back about nonsense ideas like rigid schedules. Hopefully they wouldn't pull him in to be extra muscle on any jobs, though. Those were getting unpleasant, and he had other things to do today. A smile crept across his lips. Kaleek was even more demanding about schedules than work was when she had an idea in her head. This was one appointment Tirak had zero plans to be late for. One more day of getting to completely dunk on his little sister and still pretend it was practice training? Yeah, no way he would miss it, even if someone offered him the whole island and the ocean around it too. He paused to wonder what her powers would do to her after they set in. Would she really be able to control both elements at the same time? He had never heard of somebody doing that before. And most importantly, would it make her go feral like everyone said? Somehow Tirak doubted it. Kaleek had already been a feral brat since day one. A feral brat that he loved fiercely, of course. He didn't know anything about hybrids. No one really did. But the idea didn't even make sense. Why would one extra power triple someone's inner darkness like they claimed? Tirak tapped his shadow sight to find a spice jar that was hiding near the back of a cupboard above the gloomy stove. Wouldn't a second element make their shadow weaker instead of stronger? If anything, Tirak's sister was destined to become the purest saint that ever walked the island's shores. Now there was a thought. Tirak caught himself before he could snicker out loud. In the end, though, all this theory crafting was just an effort to distract himself from the unbroken chain of noises on the other side of the room. This was a ritual for him, his safe place before the day shoveled another heap of dung onto his head. He would wake himself up with glass tea, yawn over the kettle, and roll his eyes at Dad's newest attempt to chat. Which reminded him, it was about time for another eye roll. And so instead we'll pick up breakfast sticks, her favorite, you remember, on our way to the arena so that she can pick out which weapon and equipment she wants to use in tonight's graduation. Which, that will take up most of the morning, of course. Tirak nodded absently. He kept stirring his small pot. It was so close to boiling. Dad had been droning on and on about their plans for Kaleek's birthday ever since Tirak woke up. As if last month's party hadn't been overblown enough. He wondered how much of the fuss was just another attempt to cover up her half-breed birth. Onak was always coming up with ways to dote on her, and always expecting Tirak to just go along with it all. Onak certainly never did much to make him feel special. She'll have to join the rest of the graduates to participate in the ceremony after that. Assuming her nature doesn't awaken tomorrow, you mean? Tirak corrected. Onak scoffed. Of course she'll awaken today. Maker's Own never find their powers late. Right. She was so much more special because Maker had built her by hand, just like the first generation. Not a lowly natural born like the rest of them, like himself. Tirak wanted to throw in his earlier offer to bet on whether the second nature she awakened would be a sea turtle or mosquito. But he valued eating dinner for the next month a little too much. Onak had kept talking right on through his thoughts. Wait, what was that last part? Wear something nicer than tattered pocket shorts for a change, or I'll cuff you both on the ear. He is one of the city's most important citizens, and his mate-to-be is no small girl among Beery's staff either. This is a very important wedding for all of us, no matter how long it goes into the night. It makes me happy to see him pick a mate from outside the village. People need to get over the idea that Beery and I broke things off for such a trivial reason. We didn't. She just has her own village to lead, And I... Tirak nodded, thankful that his back was still turned. That way, Onak didn't have to see the confusion his face must have been radiating. But he didn't continue. Wait, silence? That was new. Tirak turned just in time to see Onak sag into a chair by the kitchen table. It groaned and flexed under his mighty bulk. He looked depressed. Great. Tirak couldn't handle this again, too. It's okay, Onak. She can't hate you forever. Tirak said it not because it was true, it wasn't, but because he knew that's what Onak wanted to hear. Eldress Beery was a female. Of course she could find a way to go on hating forever. But Onak brightened at the encouragement, and soon he was back to all his planning. Seriously, though, what wedding was this? And when had Dad sent someone to train under Beery? Dark, how had that tempest of an Eldress not spat in the poor girl's face? Assuming she was an Umbri at least. She had to be, right? An Igni wouldn't have lasted 2 days in that swampy village. Well, he wasn't going to get an answer now, so Tirak shrugged inwardly and made a mental note to ask Kaleek about it when they met up later. Either way, the invite was a surprise of its own. Onak had never really mixed his home life with his role as Umbra's elder before now. Sure, people knew about those 2 oddball kids that hung around his manor, but nobody really knew him. And his sister? Well, most people thought of Kaleek as just that half-breed monster. A pet that only someone as powerful as an elder would keep around. Birthday parties were always an especially sore point for her because of that. It was pretty hard to invite friends over when you didn't have any worth inviting. Oh, right. Planning the day out. She'll probably want to explore the market before that. Shop for a spear or something with you, if I know my Cal. But that probably won't take more than an hour. Tirak plastered on a grimace, but hey, that part didn't sound all too bad. If only it was going to happen. Onak, can't we just have a simple party for once? Tirak asked. Onak scoffed and gave him a stern look. My little girl will only turn 4 years once in her life. We have to celebrate the day she becomes a full-grown lady. He stopped and gave Tirak a stern look. You're on duty again today, aren't you? Tirak shrank down. Yes? Onak sighed and pinched the bridge of his wide nose. I'm serious, boy. I can tell your officer you have the day off, and he'll understand. The guard always has someone else they could call. You work too much. It's not guard duty, Onak. Somebody needs a courier package before noon. I already told you. The courier companies listen to me too, Onak offered. And it's important to remind the girl she matters to you. You're her big brother, boy. It would make Kaleek's day if you change your mind. I'm fine. I'll hang out with her later. When? Later, Tirak enunciated. Another prolonged sigh. Onak stood up and started pacing. Why I bother at all is beyond me. Anyway, as long as none of the guild advisors corner me in the market, we can all swing by. Tirak silently tipped the coffee into a mug and walked outside to the balcony. He sank into a fur-covered armchair and stared out at the orange glow of their city coming to life. With a bitter sip, he relished the wakeful strength that washed through him and settled back to watch the townscape while his mind drifted free. From his vantage atop this cliff, he could see almost everything. He wondered how long it would take Dad to realize he was talking to an empty room. That made him chuckle. Probably an hour. Tirak slammed his fist against the railing in frustration. Why was everything about Kaleek? Was it really so hard to even acknowledge his existence with a simple, "Good morning, how's it going, son?" even just once? Well, no. For one, Onak only knew how to call him boy.
over enunciating it as Bullwye with that stuck-up Umbri accent. Tirak guessed he didn't recognize anyone but Kaleek as his family. Probably not even his original Umbri villagers. His hand twisted into a balled-up paw as his thoughts drifted further away. Metal and skin melted and flowed into new patterns. Fur began to sprout in patches. He didn't notice. Why did he bother sticking around this ridiculous excuse for a family anyway? They both just ignored him, used him, tortured him with the reminders of the real parents he lost, and of the siblings he might have had. Sure, Tirak was 60 and birthdays didn't matter anymore, but Onok paid attention to the tiniest milestones in Kaleek's life, while he went ignored. Did either of them even remember both kids shared a birthday? He and she were even a nice whole octet apart. Tirak's huff came out like a growl. That giant fool and his twin-element freak, both of them, they just... He stopped himself, sighing out a ragged breath. Pointed ears melted back into the hairline atop his head. His jaws lost their panther-like muzzle, but his eyes remained narrow slits as he opened them again. When he pulled his hand away from the rail, the metal beam traced a jagged, deformed line that glowed softly red. That could have ended badly. He wrenched his mind back toward the sleepy morning and the sights of his pretend dad's underground village. But other memories kept sneaking their way in. Before he had noticed what his hand was doing, a dented locket had slipped out his shorts and sat open in his palm. Broken facets of what used to be Igna's emblem shined red against his face from inside. The whole left tongue of flame was completely gone, and cracked lines ran through the pieces that he had glued back into place. He saw hungry eyes and snapping jaws in every glint. No, he couldn't let his mind drift that way either. A light breeze wafted over his back and made his sleeveless shirt ruffle, sucking fresh air from the surface tunnels behind him and over the cliff's edge. It would filter through the terraced neighborhoods below, then funneled toward the river's outlet at the lowest level of the cavern. The town was split into 3 wide layers of disc-like terraces, 2 of which were visible below him, while the uppermost just barely peeked out around the walls on either side. His level. The rich Umbri level. Windows slowly ignited here and there, joining the cavern's imitation of sunrise as their hearths were rekindled for the morning meal. Most of what he saw were ramshackle Ignii homes. All the Umbrii neighborhoods were hidden from sight up here on top tier, where they wove artistically between various market streets, rock gardens, and all sorts of uselessly decorative nonsense. The only exception was Onok's neighbor, for the elders of Shadow and Fire couldn't rule as equals if they didn't live side by side. Here, at the precipice that separated the Umbrii from their lessers down below. Tirak wondered if Elder Hakaz ever felt cut off the way that he did. They were the only 2 Ignii Tirak knew of that were allowed to live up here. As if seeing the rest of the island were a privilege too good for the smelly fire types. No, that wasn't fair. Ignii could visit the rest of the island any time they wanted to, provided they were fit enough to climb the dangerous collection of rock spikes and fraying rope ladders from bottom tier up to the Aura Bridge. Easily 200 heads high. Then all they had to do was survive the frigid mountain weather until they could hike back down to a more livable climate. Perfectly reasonable. Of course, they had no need to take one of these shorter, straighter routes. Those were for Sibrii who actually mattered. His thumb idly traced the ridges and fingerprints embedded into his mug's metal surface. It wasn't a pretty piece, but it held water and didn't wobble when he set it down. Sure, he could have asked Dad for some disgustingly fragile piece of glassware, but he preferred having his own skills to trust, even if the thing did lean a little to one side. He was going to fix that one of these days.
Maybe he should risk paying that girl Sarah another visit at the forge. She hadn't seemed to mind teaching him how to use the bellows and tools last time. The discs of his ears vibrated. His attention snapped back. He heard it again. Someone was throwing pebbles at a window. It was close by, but that was too far away to be for him. Unless... Curses. The gang sent that kid again. Tirak sighed and gulped the rest of his mug. Chewing on a few undissolved bits of sand glass, he swung his legs over the railing and shimmied toward the side of the house. Best to intervene before the pimple-faced messenger got caught vandalizing the esteemed windows of Elder Onok, and had to explain why a dirty Igni was way up here. Before he got there, he passed beneath one open window, which had a length of white cloth fluttering in the morning draft. A coarse hymn fluttered past, just barely missing his head. His heart stilled for a deadly second, before thundering onward again. His sister's gown hung from a hook next to her sill. A breeze was sucking it out the window. It was true the things looked like rough grit polishing rags. He grimaced, remembering how his own had felt on his shoulders 8 months ago. He dared a glance over the windowsill and breathed out a sigh. Kaleek was still asleep inside. His hand found its way into the satchel tied around his neck, to where a perfectly tailored set of warrior's leathers were rolled up into a neat bundle. "One more day, Key. Then we can torch that torture device together. Throw it down a mine shaft where it belongs. I promise," he whispered. Kaleek looked peaceful, nestled deep into a half-dozen furs without a care. One arm hung out past the edge of the cot. A pale, almost white forearm sat at the base of deep blue fingers. It was one of those rare times where she didn't look consumed with worry over being a horrible freak. He grimaced at the sight. Those colors really did look gross together. It was even worse whenever she tried to wear an outfit with Umbra's colors. Black, purple, blue, and teal, pearl, whatever she called it. Yuck. A sudden wave of fondness burned away the impulsive thought. No, he shouldn't think like that. His sister had never asked for her elements. Ugly or not, he wouldn't give her up for anything on this island. Unfortunately, it didn't look like Tirak would get a chance to wish her a happy birthday. He leaned a small shard pouch on the lip of the window for her to find later. Then, after scrawling a quick note in charcoal across the sill, he moved on to deal with the idiot who was trying to get himself caught. "Sorry, job came up. See you this afternoon when I kick your butt." He grinned to himself, let her panic for a few heartbeats over who might be spying on her at night. He was going to enjoy getting one last chance to knock her flat before her powers had a chance to awaken. Things would be way too fair after that. Girl was tougher than pure steel and 8 times sharper.